Well, can we give it up for that history lesson from the greatest governor in America, Ron DeSantis? Imagine where you all would be at if you had a lesson like that every day, where you're hearing from the governor who can tell you time and time again why some of these messages are so problematic. I know that it truly resonates to be in an environment like this where you have so much enthusiasm, so much passion towards an ideology that so many of us have been negatively impacted by. Everybody knows that I'm Greek with a name like Anastasios Kamoutsis, but what folks don't realize is that I'm also Cuban. And when I come here and have heard the stories of my grandparents who fled communist Cuba, like you, board member Alonzo, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, those were the stories of victims of communism that every student in this state and in this nation should hear about so that they understand, critically understand why they believe in what they believe in. Thanks to this governor, we ensure that on this day, every year, November 7th, is Victims of Communism Day, where students across the state in high school will receive 45 minutes of instruction related to this. Now, I remember when the governor passed this, this passed through the legislature and the governor signed the bill, there was a big event that was taking place, and I see my good friend, Senator Calatayud, who has definitely behind the scenes done quite a bit of advocacy as it relates to this constitutional republic and spreading the message on the evils of communism. But I remember she was at the event. I remember many were at the event. And it was on November 7th, 2022, the day before the governor's reelect. And you know what the media said? Well, they picked November 7th because it was the day before the governor's reelect because he wanted to use it as an opportunity to campaign, which was horrible. It was horrible. But these were the kind of attacks that this governor has often faced to be able to champion liberty and freedom in this state. The reality is, if you know the actual history, November 7th, 1917 was when the Bolshevik Revolution began in Russia, and that is why on November 7th we talk about Victims of Communism Day. And so this is an incredible honor to be here. I'm so thankful to be in my hometown, Miami. My mom still lives in Hialeah, right behind Westland Mall, so they're the Hialeah folks that are in the house. But it's also important to remember that this is a solemn day that is not only about remembering the oppression and suffering caused by these communist regimes, but remembering and honoring those who lost their lives or who were negatively impacted. I think of my grandmother, Ida Vives, who still lives here in Miami, and my father, Reinaldo Vives, who unfortunately is in hospice right now and in his last days. Their families were torn apart. My grandmother had 13 siblings. Many of them stayed and died in Cuba. I remember it was like mission trips. As a kid growing up, she would go over there because she didn't trust the communist government in Cuba. She didn't trust that the money she was sending was actually making it to our family because they often said, we did not receive the money you had received. And so she would go over there. She would bring these massive bags wrapped up. You've seen it at the airport in saran wrap to be able to bring supplies like food, to be able to bring canned goods, clothing, medicine. I have cousins in Cuba that when their 3-year-old has a fever, they're putting the child in a cold bath because they do not have Tylenol. That's the medical services that they receive, even though the communist government would have you believe that they have the greatest healthcare system in the entire world. It's not true. And it's important you hear the anecdotes from the people that were directly impacted. It's important you receive this instruction to understand what these ideologies lead to. And so I'm thankful that on Victims of Communism Day, students learn about the atrocities committed under the communist governments, including famines, forced labor camps, political persecution, and systemic suppression of freedom and faith. People don't realize in Cuba, for years, there were underground churches that were taking place because you could not profess your faith publicly or you would be prosecuted, you would be imprisoned, you would be executed. We are so blessed to live in a country where so many of our families came to be able to have that American dream where they could simply, freely practice their religion without persecution. We talk about Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Fidel Castro, Pol Pot, Nicolas Maduro, Hugo Chavez. These are not just names in a history textbook. They are warning signs. They are stark reminders of what happens when the government replaces truth with ideology and liberty with control and the abuse of power. When students comprehend the horrors of communism, they are inspired to appreciate and defend our freedoms. In 2024, the governor, he mentioned that he signed Senate Bill 1264, which created the Institute of Freedom here in the Americas, that promotes this idea of democracy and individual liberties, particularly in Central and South America and Latin America. And there are so many people that serve on that board that I'm particularly grateful for. But one of them was actually my professor at FIU, Orlando Gutierrez Boronat. Anybody know who that is? Let's give it up for Orlando. He is a huge member of this community, a Cuban exile that has fought for years so that students understand the perils and the evils of communism. And so I'm so thankful that the governor appointed him to the Institute of Freedom for the Americas. They're doing incredible work, and I thank everybody who serves in that capacity. But as the governor mentioned, as a result of that legislation, there were all standards that our State Board of Education are going to vote on next week as it relates to communism. Specifically, comprehensive instruction on the history of communism is now going to be provided to you students in addition to the 45 minutes of instruction that you are receiving every November 7th on the history of communism. As a result of that legislation, the Department of Education and Florida educators and content experts across the state developed these new rigorous standards, which are built upon lessons to teach not just the perils not just during Victims of Communism Day, but also to provide students with a deeper understanding of how communist regimes have suppressed freedoms, have abused powers, and inflicted suffering across the board. And so you're going to see, I'm sure there's going to be some media attention related to it. There have been some acts over the Tampa Bay Times that have criticized the standards, but we stand from what they represent and what our students are going to be able to be taught. It is now more than ever that students understand the dangers of communism. Too many of our youth have been captivated by politicians, pop culture figures, and social media influencers promising the false hope of equality without the freedoms that will be stripped away as a result. When you see individuals who are promising programs like free buses, free childcare, rent freezes, punitive taxes on the wealthy, and government-run grocery stores, my grandmother tells me she saw very similar policies being put forth in Cuba before Castro took over. And so it's important, as you learn about the history of communism, that you think critically. You think through these policies and think, who's going to pay for this? What is going to be the impact as a result? And so you have these individuals, time and time again, they come around from time and time, where we call them the silver-tongued conmen, who eventually turn to strongmen in order to achieve their sick and twisted political ideology. And they're clever. They push this communist agenda in a way that often people are bamboozled. And so it's important that we teach these policies so that students are able to critically think for themselves and see and recognize them as they become adults. To the victims of communist regimes and their families, Florida will always remember and honor you today for standing up against oppression and corruption. And as long as I serve as commissioner, we will never forget your stories. We will teach every student that freedom must be defended and it can never be taken for granted. To our teachers that are implementing these standards and teaching today on Victims of Communism Day, thank you. Thank you for helping our students understand how once prosperous countries can turn themselves into devastating wastelands under communism. And to our students, you are the guardians of freedom. You must recognize them and protect them. And the promise of equality without freedom is no future at all. Today we honor the victims of communism by ensuring that its lies never find a way in the homes of our Floridians, not now, not ever. Thank you, and God bless you all.